Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled Identity Management Beyond Traditional Thinking. I'm your moderator, Jackie Sass from Merkle's marketing team. To lead today's webinar, we're joined by three industry experts. Matthew Mobley, Merkle's Chief Technology Officer and SVP of Marketing Technology. Derek Gallier, Vice President of Marketing Technology at Merkle. And Matt Austin, Senior Director, Identity Management Lead at Merkle. And now I'll turn things over to Derek to get us started.
All right, thanks, Jackie. So over the next 45 minutes, we're going to walk through several subjects, including the following. So over the past 30 or so years, we've been talking to our customers about multiple methods, and it actually began with the Postal Service. Over on the far left, back a long time ago, it was the first and largest addressable media platform. If I actually had your name and address, I could mail you something. And then when I got your phone number, I could call you. And when I got an email, I could email you. And I was pretty sure it was going to be you that was getting the email. And I say pretty sure because sometimes that may have not been the case depending upon if those emails were actually shared. Then came the browser, which was really the pothole in the addressability world. And that's because browsers use cookies to identify people. But a cookie, it really identifies a device, and really barely even that. For an example, I as an individual, I could actually be 8 cookies on 8 different devices, or I could have one device, like maybe it's the iPad in my kitchen or something, and I could easily have 5 different users in my household that is actually sharing that single device, and so therefore that singular cookie. But finally, we see the rise of the ID-based targeting again. And it's things like the Facebook custom audiences and Google customer match and things of that nature. And that kind of puts us right back on the right course to where we started. And that's the ability to know if a person is actually the person we're trying to reach. So another way of thinking about it is this goal of moving from anonymous identities or identities that we think is the right person to truly definitive identities that allow us to know we're addressing the right person. And in fact, sometimes we don't even have a choice in terms of what we know or maybe what we don't know about you. It's simply based on a collection of available data at any point in time. In these situations, as you can see on the left-hand side, we start with a fuzzy view of you. But as we collect more identity signals over time, and as that picture starts to become clearer over time, and that clarity is established, we can effectively address you as a true person with confidence for marketing activation and measurement. So let's actually talk about what is the anatomy of an identity. And at the simplest level, we at Merkle think of an identity as something that is actually built from available signals collected from 3 different tiers. And we start with traditional data about you and your physical location and address. This can include your home or maybe it's your work address and maybe any phone numbers that we have about you. But along with your name, this traditional PII forms your terrestrial identity. But each person in this household actually uses devices. So she may have a smartphone and a tablet, and her husband and a roommate actually might have the same. In fact, they actually might share devices, and together all of this forms the device identity. And we're going to talk more about the device identity and including that in your identity graph a little bit later. But when she uses her device to actually browse websites, and that could also be different mobile apps or social networks and things of that nature, she could be using her personal devices. And the exact same thing with him. And in fact, together, they could actually be using the shared devices within their household or within their residence for accessing either the same or potentially different online destinations. And each of these endpoints have their own method actually for maintaining their own digital graphs. And today, this is what we actually refer to as the digital identity. But to understand your customer and their behaviors and actions, we think it's critical to actually link these identities together to create a singular and unified version of the customer. So we need a strategy that actually collects data from all of these different tiers that we just talked about and is used to actually establish the identity graph of that true person. This graph actually becomes the foundation behind what we always refer to as that 360-degree view of the customer or of the person. But the reality is that the devil's in the details, because as we collect these terrestrial identity signals, such as PII, or it could be customer account numbers from your operational systems. We're also collecting device data, and that could be things like cookies or mobile application IDs or device IDs and things of that nature. And we're also collecting data from your digital properties, and this includes things like data from web analytics and tagging platforms or social platforms when it's made available. But the actual goal is to develop a well-formed strategy that actually fits into these three areas and to actually solve these three intersections. And when you actually can do that, when you can actually solve these intersections, that you're trying to create a platform for true identity management excellence. All right, so let's now take a look at the traditional customer data integration and what is actually used in the foundation and the creation of the identity map. And it first begins with the collection of your terrestrial data via customer data integration, or CDI. I think everybody probably knows what CDI processing is, but it's a platform to process and manage basically your PII data. And a well-formed CDI process is going to perform many functions as part of that traditional CDI process. And that can include parsing of data, standardizing data, validating data, like validating your addresses. It also includes the deduplication and collapsing of the data records where it's appropriate. And this is an important part. This also includes the core process of actually creating the identifier keys themselves, whatever they may be called in your organization or in your solution. And these are things like person IDs or CRM IDs. Here at Merkle, we call these individual IDs. But as shown on the right, the standard terrestrial hierarchy of data includes actually the identifiers for the physical address of the person, and then household identifiers, which is based upon the unique last names of the people at that address, and then finally those actual individual identifiers that we were just talking about that actually contain those individual IDs. And actually on this slide, I wanted to show you a version of the terrestrial CDI process in a business or maybe an organizational context. In this case, we actually establish an organizational ID as opposed to the household ID that you saw on the previous slide that may actually have unique sites or locations, each with their own unique addresses. And the actual individual that we talked about before, where we're actually establishing the individual IDs, these are people that are actually associated at that site level. So this concept of organizational terrestrial identity graph is just an extension of what we just discussed as it relates to the actual traditional identity graph for a household.